Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good Saturday morning. Our publicly owned utility, the Lansing Board of Water and Light, has assembled an advisory committee to develop recommendations on post-Eckert power plant energy production that Winkin, Blinkin, and Nod is going to go out of business by 2020. We've got with us this morning three guests. Two are members of the Citizens Advisory Committee. One is Jeff Pillen, who is was a longtime executive for the State Public Service Commission and is now as Director of Energy Assurance and Midwest Regional Coordinator of the National Association of State Energy Officials. And also Douglas Jester, who is on the green end of environmental consulting with his own firm, Five Lakes Energy, and a former mayor of East Lansing. And Rory Nooner, an energy consultant who is representing My Air, My Health coalition on the advisory commission. Welcome to all three of you. And joining me, and it's a pleasure to have back with us, Andy Belaskovitz, who is the reporter for the online Midwest Energy News website. Well, let's get to it. We've got Winkin, Blinkin, and Nod, which is what, pre-1950 power plant is still producing energy from coal. And I want to start, Rory, with you. As I drove over to the studio today, of course, I saw Winkin, Blinkin, and Nod, and I was thinking, man, that's dumping coal right on me. What does Winkin, Blinkin, and Nod do to our environment in Lansing?
Well, we do, the coalition that I represent, My Air, My Health, does work with health professionals and health organizations across the state of Michigan to do exactly that, highlight some of the health impacts that result from Michigan's continued reliance on coal as a source of electricity production. We in Michigan have asthma rates that are 25% higher than the national average. If you look across the Lansing region, every zip code except for 48917, which is Delta Township, we have asthma hospitalization rates that are even higher than Michigan's average. So Michigan's higher than the national, and then the mid-Michigan region is being burdened with some of these high asthma hospitalization rates. Those are obviously not solely attributable to the substances that are released into the air when we burn coal, but there's definitely a trigger connection and an issue that I think that we should take seriously looking forward at. We want reliability, we want affordability. We think about affordability. Can we think of it a little bit beyond that number that's on our utility bill and think about the health impact?
All right, Doug, anything to add on that front?
Well, the health impacts are really quite important. In addition, there are a lot of environmental impacts. Coal is the most carbon-intensive fuel that we use to produce power. So our concerns about climate change need to address other fuels as well, but they center on coal. And in addition, coal contains a rich mixture of bad stuff. So a variety of heavy metals that are poisonous to animals, sometimes to plants, and certainly to people. A lot of organic compounds that are carcinogenic or cause other kinds of problems. So coal plants on their way out. I think probably the last coal plant ever to be built in the United States has been built. And we will be changing to a different way of producing electricity.
Jeff, before we turn to what the charge is of this Citizens Advisory Committee you're on, tell us what you can about what are we facing down the road as we transition from coal to non-coal in our community. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what's this going to cost us?
Well, that's really what this effort is all about. I mean, it's about long-term planning and trying to come up with an optimal solution that recognizes these environmental impacts, recognizes the cost of integrating new technologies, but there's also opportunities, and there's opportunities to make a more optimal system. Programs such as energy efficiency save customers money, so there's a benefit there. Investments in the community to strengthen infrastructure enhances reliability. You know, when businesses can't operate when the power's not there. So, you know, these are important considerations as we look down the road to say, how can we reconfigure the system and rebuild it to keep the cost affordable, as you were saying, to make it more environmentally acceptable, to invest in the community and our infrastructure. So those are important objectives that we're going to look at in this overall effort.
All right, Andy?
Douglas, I wanted to ask, so Eckerd is a pretty sizable piece of the BWL's generation portfolio. And so I understand this committee is sort of going to look at where renewables might fit in and where energy efficiency might fit in. But it sounds like there may end up being some new capacity that has to be built, and some kind of generating plant, maybe natural gas. Where could BWL feasibly do that around the area?
The BWL service territory extends into the fringes of Lansing metropolitan area, and there are a number of reasonably large open spaces, if you will. In some ways, the most natural thing is to use existing plant sites and replace those with new plants, because there's a lot of infrastructure, particularly electrical infrastructure, that's already in place that wouldn't have to be duplicated at extra cost.
Mm-hmm. And Jeff, what's your sense? I know it's pretty early on, but going forward, what role sort of renewable energy is going to play in terms of making up that lost generation when Eckerd is retired?
Well, that's really to be determined, but clearly the Board of Water Light's making investments in renewables today. They've contracted for capacity for wind. They have some solar arrays. They're building a new project in that regard. So clearly they have made some commitments to renewables. I think that trend will continue. The costs are changing. The costs are becoming more competitive with traditional generation resources. But we really have to look down the road and look at the whole equation and what are future energy costs going to be, cost of natural gas, improvements in technology, efficiency gains. And when you're trying to project out 20 years, that's a pretty tricky kind of activity, because things are changing pretty dramatically in energy markets today.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder real quick, because you work in several different states, how, where the Board of Water and Light is at, sort of compared to what utilities in other states are facing at this point in time?
Well, everyone's facing the challenges of what we are seeing with coal and the compliance potentially of the Clean Coal Plan, or the Clean Energy Plan. That's going to make some significant changes across the country. But every utility service territory is unique and different, and so you really have to look at the particulars of the service territory, where it's located, what the loads look like, and the loads in Lansing are much different than the loads in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So different composition of power requirements.
Yeah. And Rory, so it seems like going forward, natural gas is going to be playing a larger role in the BWL's makeup, likely, in a lot of utilities. Where does your organization stand on sort of the benefits or drawbacks of transitioning from coal right to natural gas?
I think we look at it as certainly from an emissions profile, from a health impact perspective, it's much better than coal. However, I think whenever you're burning something, you're releasing substances into the air. I also understand, until we have the ability to do more storage of renewables or other technology advances, natural gas, I think we often talk about it as potentially a necessary bridge option. So we don't have a necessary position on natural gas. We kind of understand it from a pragmatic approach. Whenever we're moving away from coal, the data is really clear that the health impacts will be positive.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so are there sort of cost estimates yet in terms of what it's going to take for the BWL to smoothly transition you know, once Eckert's retired, and I know that's going to include some sort of infrastructure and transmission upgrades around the city, but have they started kicking around costs yet?
Not yet. Board of Water and Light, I think, is taking a commendable approach to this. They started by establishing this advisory committee, and they're holding a series of public meetings to educate both the members and interested public, leading up to some decisions probably early next year about what kinds of options to consider, what scenarios about, you know, future prices and regulations and those kinds of things to consider, and then they will do the kind of modeling that leads to those answers. So we don't anticipate hearing real numbers put on the table until February or March.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Douglas, I wanted to ask you, being, you know, this being in the context of a lot of federal regulations that are coming down, I know the head of the BWL said recently that, you know, it's hard to run a business when you have a lot of the rules sort of changing out from under you, and it's hard to forecast. Do you sympathize with that position?
I do, but I would point to a couple of things that we can do to address it. One is a lot of the regulations are adopted because we have health effects, environmental effects, and so on that we've known about for some time. And any utility that is operated on the basis that all they have to do with respect to health and environment is to comply with the regulations is running a risk that there will be new regulations to address those remaining effects. And therefore, whatever assumptions they made, you know, will have to change. And secondly, all businesses face risks. The world doesn't work the way you expect it to. And so your planning needs to not only seek to find the best answer, assuming some future, but to find robust answers to a variety of futures. And so it's important that this process, like all utility and business planning processes, address the risk and uncertainty about the future rather than assuming that we know what it is.
Mm-hmm. And Jeff, sort of simultaneously, the state is sort of readying itself to put together this compliance plan with these federal, the Clean Power Plan rules. How will sort of what BWL is doing, you know, either run counter or work with that process as the state is sort of moving on its track?
Yeah, it's certainly interconnected because one of their options could be to buy power from the grid, and the cost of the power from the grid will be affected by the decisions that are made in the implementation of those plans. And I'm not certain as to actually which path. There's a number of paths that states can take to achieve compliance, and they all have different implications to how it would affect the Board of Water and Light in terms of the overall grid operation, because they are fully integrated into the Mid-Continent independent system operator that does the dispatch for, you know, most of the Mid-Continent of the United States. So it's really a very interconnected system, and so these decisions do have an effect.
Mm-hmm.
The timing of this is interesting from a couple of perspectives, I guess. First of all, we have going on at the same time the financial health team's study of whether indeed we should sell the Lansing Board of Water and Light. And I wanted to ask you about that. Does it concern you when you're talking about this transition to a greener energy that we might move away from a public utility? Is there an advantage to moving away? Can it move faster? Jeff, start with you.
Well, that's a difficult one to really come to grips with.
I try to ask the
you know,
ones.
I like local control. I mean, I think that we have the decisions in the community to make about what we want to do in the future, and there's some very significant advantage to that. I mean, if it were sold to some, you know, corporation to operate some other utility, I mean, what interest do they necessarily have in terms of the real interest of the citizens of this community? And I think that I think there's some advantages to that. You know, there has been advantage. We've been a relatively low-cost utility. Mm-hmm. I've been a customer of Board of Water and Light for 44 years now, and you know, they've been a bit cheaper than Consumers Energy for many of those years. So,
Rory, your thoughts?
I grew up in a house. My mom worked for the Board of Water and Light for 30+ years in human resources, and so I think there's, Jeff mentions the sort of cost advantages, but there are also those intangibles of the municipally owned utility where they're a big presence in the community, both as an employer and, if you look at their involvement in all sorts of volunteer organizations. So I think there's, it would be much different if we had an investor-owned utility have that kind of presence in the community. I think they can certainly do some goodwill as well, but I think, as an employer, as a point of pride, there are those cost advantages, but also those kind of intangibles that are important.
In this decision-making process, though, can a privately owned company move faster on these things, or is this all so regulated that it really doesn't matter?
I spend a lot of time as an expert witness before the Public Service Commission and do some similar work in other states. And I would say the Board of Water and Light can be more nimble than the conventional regulated utilities. The decision-making process through the utility regulators is inherently slow, and it should be because it deals with items of large consequence, both in terms of cost and reliability of power and those kinds of things. But it would be challenging to have to go through that. I would say the Board of Water and Light has proven over the years, and they've had glitches now and then, but to be more nimble and more responsive to their customers than I think has been true of the major investor-owned utilities.
Another question on timing I wonder about is 5 years seems like a long time, but I know because I was called on a survey, one of the things they're talking about is building a power plant outside of Ingham County in cooperation with a private utility, I presume. All of that sounds like not something you're just going to do overnight. And are you concerned about the timing? Is there enough time by 2020 to get us off coal?
From the information that was presented, at least at the first meeting, a lot of this has to do with their transmission capability. I think I know there's people in the environmental community and the public health community that would love to see Eckerd come offline faster than that, and hope to see it come offline faster than that. But again, we have to be pragmatic here. You're managing. Again, as they said at the first meeting, we have an expectation that when we flick the light switch on, there will be electricity, and that's a very complicated endeavor. And so, I hope it is enough time.
Doug, your thoughts?
The 5 years is about the right horizon for investments in modern technologies. Nuclear and coal took even longer.
Much longer.
But it's plausible, for example, to decide and build a natural gas plant, solar and wind, and to do a good deal of energy efficiency in 5 years. And the increment of load that we have to address, either through efficiency or new generation, to be able to close Eckerd, actually isn't very large. It's just that we want to make the right investment now toward what we then know is coming. Erickson at some point is going to have to close, and the odds are that by 2030 the Bell River power plant, which is owned and operated by DTE, but Board of Water and Light has a contract for some of that power, that plant will probably close by 2030. So there's a lot of future that we need to look at in order to make the right investment now. And that's the reason, I think, to start this planning.
Yeah, and the board's plan is going to go out 20 years. So it will have to take into consideration not only this first incremental replacement, but take a look at how they optimize to the future, because decisions we make today will affect the decisions in the future as well. And so you can set the stage for things, and you can do incremental. I mean, so you could bring in some options now and then bring in other options later, depending on their lead time, and they are quite longer. Just to follow up on your comment, Doug, the length of time to do this stuff, when I was at the Michigan Public Service Commission, it would take the utility companies almost a year to produce their integrated resource plan, and the commission staff would take the better part of a year to actually critique that plan. So here's 2 years just in the planning cycle, and in this planning cycle it's much shorter than that. But it's a smaller utility, it's not quite as complex as a system like Edison or Consumers has.
Andy?
Douglas, you did mention you know, the other big coal plant that's here in Lansing, the Erickson plant. What's the role of that plant going to be going forward? Do you see that being able to sort of be modified to be able to curb emissions, or do you see that getting shuttered as well?
One of the things that my firm has been doing is developing integrated resource planning tools for a number of states to use in finding the least cost way to comply with the Clean Power Plan. And one of those is Michigan. The state, as we've discussed earlier, has a lot of work to do to develop a state plan. But if they pursue the least cost plan, it certainly leads to closing Erickson, at least as a coal plant. Probably somewhere in the 2025 to 2030 time frame. Potentially we could address that earlier. It's really not practical to think about applying pollution controls to it as a coal plant and achieving what's necessary.
Okay. And Jeff, state lawmakers right now are looking at, as the state's renewable energy standard comes to an end, you know, we've got to 10% renewable energy here, and state lawmakers want to switch to this system, this integrated resource planning system that you said is pretty arduous. You know, at the Public Service Commission, and this one here is taking several years. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on whether Michigan would be better off extending its renewable energy standard going forward as a way to sort of maybe cut down on some of the time or planning to have to achieve these emission cuts.
Well, you know, if you're doing an integrated resource plan, the whole concept of that approach is to look at all the options. So that everything's on the table. So you would consider renewables and conventional and energy efficiency, and you would take a look at their relative cost and benefit and how they will affect the overall system. So that's a good way to do it, because you get the optimal kind of mix, and you can reduce the total revenue required to operate the utility if you construct those plans correctly. And you still have to provide other considerations like reliability, environmental compliance, and so on and so forth. So, you know, I think the answer needs to be part of the good planning that needs to be done. And, you know, the trend seems to be increased use of renewables by utilities because the cost of these resources are coming down, and efficiency gains are developing in terms of making them more cost effective as well. So we've got to look out in the future to see what we can anticipate. You mentioned storage, for example, a very important aspect of developing renewables that tend to be somewhat intermittent in nature. And if some of the battery technologies develop, you know, that can change the nature of the mix and make some things cost effective, maybe not are cost effective today. So I think you really got to stand back and look at it. We've got a very much changing energy landscape in this country today.
I do wonder, though, to Jeff's point, though, if the IRP process does illuminate, or the Board of Water and Lights process does illuminate, you know, how standards really helped us here. You know, if we had waited in the Lansing region to move toward more renewables and efficiency to this point and not had standards in place, you know, we'd be looking at an even bigger problem than how do you deal with Eckert, how do you deal with Erickson, how do you deal with Bell River. So I think this is even the Citizens Advisory Committee is technically being charged with this task of just looking at Eckert, but those are big questions in my mind about Bell River and about Erickson's. If it's a 20-year planning horizon and the Clean Power Plan is here, you know, we've got to be thinking about more than just wink and blink and a nod. So I think there's a real role for standards there and pushing that conversation forward.
If I may make a small point, the standards that the state of Michigan adopted in 2008 for both efficiency and renewables were recommended by the Public Service Commission as a result of a statewide integrated resource planning process that occurred in 2005 to 2007. So that planning process told us that energy efficiency was radically cheaper than any of the alternatives, and we should do a bunch of it, and that renewables, while at that time more expensive, we would be able to drive their cost down and gain experience with them by adopting the standard that we did. So that was actually the way it should work, I think.
To what extent, though, I wonder, any of you can comment on, to what extent should publicly run entities or entities that enjoy mostly, monopoly status in the state be required to follow rules set by, their ratepayers or by the law?
I personally think that that's the price of having a monopoly.
Right. That is the quid pro quo.
May I interrupt, because I want to turn to a broader, more philosophical question. We're almost out of time. I'm sure the discussion many people are having these days, kind of like the discussion households had back in the 50s about whether to build some basement place to escape to if there was a nuclear war. A lot of people said, what a waste of time. Are you optimistic that indeed the steps we're starting to take here, as we are taking nationally, are going to be in time? There are doomsayers who, argue it's too late. Doug, do you see a future?
I worry about it every day. I do, but I also don't see a lot of time to delay and be wrong. If you look at the climate models, and this is an area that I've worked on professionally for a long time, the time lags between when you emit carbon and the full consequences play out are fairly long. And so we are committing now to things that will be affecting our children and grandchildren. And we need to be acting sooner rather than later. So I'm always pushing to find ways to make it feasible to make steady and rapid progress. That said, the trends are all now moving in the right direction. I think 2015 has been the turning point on addressing the technical and economic changes we have to make to address climate change.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 the most optimistic, where are you?
Oh, probably a 7.
Jeff, your thoughts?
Well, we've looked at these things for many years, and in fact, going back to the study you were referring to, the energy efficiency programs came out as the winners on that. They were the first things you're going to do, because a kilowatt saved is cheaper than a kilowatt burned, and it has a lot better in terms of it has very little environmental consequence. It actually removes environmental consequences in a lot of ways. So, these are things that, I think are really important to make investments in the long run. And the trend is in that direction.
And so where do you put yourself on that scale?
Mildly optimistic. I think we can do it. We've pulled it out of the hat before with technology.
Rory, got a few seconds left here.
I'll say I'll concur with Douglas that 2015, I think we're starting to really see the tide turn and people getting serious about the issue. So I'd put it at a 6 or 7.
Seems to be part of our American makeup that crisis drives all. I want to thank you all for being here today. Doug Jester, Jeff Pillin, Rory Nooner, Andy Velaskovitz. We're going to be back next week with Police Chief Mike Yankowski and Ingham County Prosecutor Stuart Dunnings to talk about the heroin overdose crisis in our community. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great weekend. See you next week.